Welcome to the Spotlight Dialogue episode 29, the evening show about raises awareness for the important role different size enterprises play in meeting the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which are SDG 8 is about decent work and economic growth, and SDG 10 is about reduce inequality within and among countries. Where this episode, we will take this dialogue coinciding with World Micro, Small, and Medium-Sized Enterprises Day, also known as MSME Day. Also, to consider entrepreneurship is the driving force of development, but entrepreneurship is not equally common everywhere, nor is it always sustainable. I'm your host, Stephen Poon. Good evening to all the audience tuning in. The Spotlight Dialogue episode 29 is brought to you by the regular team of the Special Interest Group in Circular Economy from Integrated Sustainability and Creative Strategy Research Cluster, acronym as ISUCS, also known as ISUS, at Asia Pacific University of Technology and Innovation, APU. Before I take off this episode this evening, a quick rundown on paying attention to institutions that promote entrepreneurial product and process innovation include the rule of law and flexible land, labor, and capital markets. More often than not, cities serve as hotbeds of all types of entrepreneurship, including the creation of SMEs. People in dense environments tend to be more creative and productive than elsewhere due to knowledge spillovers that are channeled through social networks or unexpected encounters. Our topic for the dialogue: SMEs reimagined, challenging the order in entrepreneurship, institution, and sustainability. Our guest for today's show, Professor of College of Management at National Sun Yat-sen University in Kaohsiung, Taiwan. He is the author or co-author of 5 books, including most recently The Future of the Post-Industrial Society, Individualism, Creativity, and Entrepreneurship, which is under the publisher of Palgrave Macmillan 2023, as well as about 60 contributions to edited books and journals such as Environment and Planning A, Environment and Planning B, Urban Analytics and City Science, and the Journal of Economic Geography. He is a fellow of the Center of Market Education in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and was the editor of the multidisciplinary journal Cosmoplus Taxis, Study in Emergent Order and Organization from 2013 to 2020. Here we are. Please welcome Professor Dr. David Emmanuel Anderson.
Thank you. It's
Hi,
great to be here.
David. Good evening to you. We're having the same time
Evening.
zone.
Yep,
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm just organizing this week. I'm teaching an intensive course on the innovation economy in the Asia Pacific region. So it's somewhat related to tonight's topic.
Oh, that's very nice, actually. So, yeah, I think you have been very busy. I remember you told me that this is your summer course. Am I right? So it's gonna be a
That's
really
right.
full days intensive. So,
Mhm.
students come from all over the places. Is it just only student from Taiwan?
Well, mostly Taiwan, Vietnam, bit from the US, etc. But the majority are Taiwanese. Yeah,
Or is it kind of international program? Am I right?
yeah.
Okay, David, cheers for the evening, for the good start, which is on the night 4. Right, David, I think this is very much of the, which is like what you just said. We're going to talk about this, which is reflecting to what you have been teaching yourself for the whole day. Yeah, innovation economy. This is a really, really exciting topic, which is very much appealing to what we are talking about, like innovation process and entrepreneurship and capital, and also capital market, and also the what is it, the this intellectual property. So of course we are not going for this intellectual property today, but we are more focused on the context of the entrepreneurship today. Okay, let's set the scene, David. The emergence of the entrepreneurship institution as a mechanism is not only for sustainability, but access to microfinancing for entrepreneurs has always become pivotal owing to the heightened spate of economic degradation, growing poverty rate, and an upsurge in rural urban migration, all currently occurring across the globe. Hence, the study recommends, as a policy implication, that entrepreneurship institutions should be established with capacity to provide more microfinance enterprises, which will guarantee their sustainability, productivity, and viability. So, David, why
Yes.
are some environmental benefits of selling services instead of goods? Give some example of this approach, please.
Well, I mean, environmental advantages of selling services. Well, it depends on what kind of service we're talking about. I think that it basically boils down to energy use in terms of uh, how much energy is used per unit of value, and also what kind of energy you use, right? I think as a general rule, the average service is more environmentally friendly than the average uh, production process for consumer goods that are tangible. But it very much depends exactly on what service you're talking about and what good you are discussing. So I don't think there is a general principle whereby services are necessarily more environmentally sustainable goods, although on average they're probably so.
Yeah, David, why market-based instrument like, for instance, emission taxes and tradable permits are cost effective, while uniform standards are generally not?
Well, uniform standards presupposes that decision makers have enough knowledge to know, for example, what the best and most efficient production technology is. And it also means that they should be able to predict innovations that haven't happened yet. So there's a real knowledge problem here. What really you need to make use of the knowledge that is generated through market exchange in order to find better solutions. And that's why most economists like the idea of a cap and trade system, for example, more than having uniform regulations, because then you can decide how much. I mean, that's something you have to decide politically. But if you decide politically that a certain amount of pollutants will be sustainable given the sustainability goals that you want to achieve, then you can set up that upper limit, and then you can let people trade permits below that limit. So in this way, we can create, in a way, new property rights that will internalize what was previously negative externalities.
No, actually, you're
And you
right,
let and
David.
you let market participants find better solutions. So you get
Yeah.
more generation of a diversity of knowledge from many different sources, rather than relying on some experts at the top who will only have a very partial view of the problem.
Yeah, David, you're right. Actually, political inclination is always there.
Yeah.
When you just mentioned this, it's always there because they are the final say. They will decide what it should be, what kind of ecosystem should be involved. Then after that, they come to the end user like you and me. Okay, David, why have sustainability issues become strategically important to managerial decision makers?
Well, first of all, anything that you will have to do becomes strategically important. Like, so if you have rules that you have to comply with, then that must be part of the strategy. Otherwise, you might get into trouble, right? But it's also because of what consumers want. So in many
Mhm.
economies around the world, especially in the more developed parts, consumers are demanding more environmentally sustainable products, and they want to know that that the production processes do not add to things like climate change, for example. So then it becomes part of the marketing strategy and the production strategy. Well, first of all, you need the production strategy. So you need to have
Yeah, yeah.
some way of making stuff that is more environmentally sustainable, but then that can also translate into a marketing strategy whereby you try to inform consumers that you're doing better in terms of what they want as consumers. So there's both a consumer side and a governmental side to this.
Mhm. David, some analysts believe that a business social legitimacy is fragile. Is it true?
Well, it depends on where you are, right? So, in some places, businesses are very legitimate, in others, maybe not so. So it depends on what people think about businesses and markets
Let's
in general.
let's talk about Asia Pacific region. Put it this way. Okay, probably you can share with me like the situation in Taiwan, and at least I get to understand better.
Okay, so the situation in Taiwan is, well, it's partly good and partly not perfect. So the good part
Okay.
is that it's very much part of the culture here to have a lot of small and medium-sized businesses. So the backbone of the Taiwanese economy is
Mm,
in often family-based firms. And
mm,
it's culturally generally accepted to start a business. That's a normal way of life here. So that is the good
mm,
part. But there is
mm.
also a less good part, and that is the propensity of the government to pick winners. So for some reason, the government here, or all governments, regardless of which political party they are, they think that they think that high tech is good by definition, right? And well, it's not necessarily true. We might need other things than high tech, right?
Yeah, but unfortunately, this is the current situation. Everyone aligning with tech, so-called
Yeah.
tech. Okay. Comparatively, David, um, would you like to share with us the differences between the place where you come from and Taiwan, like Sweden, for instance? Like what is the difference between this legitimacy context, especially between Sweden and Taiwan?
That's a very interesting question because these two economies are innovative in different ways, right? They're both.
Mm,
I think you can both consider both of them to be success stories by global standards.
mm,
The institutions are relatively well functioning compared with the global average. But the focus is much more on small businesses here in Taiwan. And on the other hand, right, high tech is heavily promoted and subsidized by the government here. And there are
likewise,
some successful
Malaysia.
examples.
Likewise,
Well, the
Malaysia.
thing is, there are several science parks in Taiwan,
Hmm.
and one of
Hmm.
them is really successful. The one in Hsinchu in the north that everybody's heard about because of TSMC. There are
Yeah,
also
yeah.
science parks here that are unsuccessful, like in the center and the south of the country. You never hear about them because they're not success stories. So
Hmm.
sometimes, governments might make the right choices, but sometimes they don't. Well, on the
Hmm.
other hand, if you look at Sweden, a lot of innovation actually occurs within larger enterprises. So there is uh, a lot of product and process innovation associated with long established firms, and they often come up with very good ideas. But there is
Hmm.
less happening at the small scale. And also the specialization profile has evolved in a different direction. So it's much more about life sciences, medicine, pharmaceuticals, and so forth. So the economic profiles are quite different.
Hmm. Okay, David, are capitalism and conservation compatible, according to your, which is understanding?
Well, I think that's a very wide question, right? But yeah, for the most part, yes, because actually capitalism is based on the idea of private property rights and sometimes also joint property rights. And many of the environmental problems that we see have to do with missing markets and missing property rights. So if we think
Hmm.
about pollution, for example, the reason that that is a problem is that we don't really have, well, we're trying to develop it now, but in the past, we didn't really develop property rights or property liabilities over
Hmm.
over the damages that are caused by polluting factories, for example. So you need more markets, not less, and you need better defined property rights. And ideally, the goal should be to internalize previous externalities. In other words, we don't want as many negative spillovers as were, associated with the Industrial Revolution.
Hmm. Okay, David, I have a little research here. I'd like to find out from your point of view. Um, Over the past decade, there has been a rise in publicly available sustainability reports and appraisals. According to KBMG, in 2020, around 90% of the world, uh, around 90% of the world's 250 largest companies now report on the sustainability compared the only 35% in 1999.
Yeah.
So while this is not the same for SMEs. The action of the large businesses often predict trends that are adopted more broadly. So, how exactly can sustainability appraisals help an SME become more sustainable?
Well, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but I think that if
Go
we
on, David.
if we're good at establishing property rights that deal with externality problems, then every company will have to deal with them because it will be part of the market. You'll have to buy and sell stuff. If it's not part of that system, then we got a lot of spillovers, right? We got a lot of leakage, and very often those leakages have negative consequences. So it's about strengthening the system of property rights, and also obviously to have a reliable legal system that supports these property rights.
Okay, David, from the environmental impact point of view, what percentage of energy use is sourced from renewable sources?
Is that a fact question?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, based
You you
which is
you mean
yeah, yeah,
globally, locally? Where?
yeah. From the Asia Pacific region.
Well, I will have to guess because I didn't look it up, so I'll have to say it's less than 10%.
So what about from Taiwan?
Also less than 10%. I know that for a
Oh,
fact. Probably about four. I think I heard something like 4 or 5%.
okay. So okay, from the social impact perspective, do all employees feel psychologically safe at work?
Well, obviously the answer is no, right? Because there are so many employees in so many companies, so there must be people who do not feel safe, right? Uh, but again, this is a very broad question, so I'm a little bit curious about exactly what kind of safety you're talking about.
What is the okay? I think let's come into a little bit more focus. What is the organization approach to supporting and engaging with the local community? Then of course automatically will be led to the employees. How do they feel safe at work? Because there is the correlation between that.
Yeah, I mean, like if you have a small business, it's very common to interact quite intensively with the surrounding neighborhood, right? When you say an SME, I'm thinking about a small workshop or a small restaurant or something like that. So almost by definition, they're going to be more integrated in the local economy than a big multinational corporation. So I guess that's one of the attractive features of small businesses. Now, I think that as to employee satisfaction and so forth, it has a lot to do with culture, as a matter of fact. So, one of the
Mhm.
things that you notice in an Asian context, and I'll take Taiwan as an example here, and especially the more traditional parts of the economy, which is dominated by SMEs, you'll find that there is a strong preference for hiring family members. And often the people who, if you get hired as a non-family member, then that might create some tension and some glass ceilings, etc. You can't really become the boss and so forth. So then you get high labor turnover, and high labor turnover in this scenario would be, I think, an indication that not everything, not everything is perfect.
What it sounds to be, you can't easily get a job if you're a non a family member. So you must set
Well,
up the
yeah,
business.
basically, an interesting. Now, so I'm going to move now to other parts of the world. Studies from Europe have shown that small and medium-sized enterprises are more likely, probably, to hire non-family members than their counterparts in Asia, but they're less likely to hire immigrants than larger enterprises, right? So if you're from
Mm.
another cultural background, it's easier to get into a multinational corporation than into a small family business. Right.
Okay. So what about in terms of venue, location, places?
Yeah.
How does it? What is the impact behind that?
Well, now it depends on what kind of industry you're in. So if it's sort of a routine service, or if it's more of a knowledge generating, knowledge-based business. But if you're
Mm,
in a knowledge-based business, and a lot of small companies actually are, you can think of
mm.
specialized consulting firms and so on. They're very much into knowledge creation. If you're in that kind of business, it's absolutely advisable to be in a major metropolitan area, not only because you'll have easier access to customers, but also because it's easier to engage in knowledge sharing with other companies that may be relevant to your activities.
Okay, David. Let's look at the economic impact here. How is the organization growing younger generation through the company?
You're now talking about replacement of retiring employees or what?
Mm, can be both way actually, but I want to look at what is the current practices, especially over Taiwan.
Yeah, so this is actually a bit of a. Now I'm going to get back to culture again, probably because I
Mm.
spent the whole day talking about culture in my lectures.
Let's go.
But
Go on.
I mean that one of the problems in many Asian cultures is that uh, many people are rewarded for being old simply because they're old, right? Rather than good at what they're doing, right? So it's quite difficult to reach a leadership position at a young age here if you compare with, let's say, the United States or England and places like that. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of promotions based on seniority, and that's I guess that it creates a sense of security and a sense of stability, but it might not always be the most dynamic decision rule that you should always, put the people who are oldest in charge.
David, based on your observation, especially in Taiwan for these years, how is the organization supporting the transition towards an economic sustainability?
You say economic sustainability.
Yeah.
So economic sustainability, I think that is what companies are best at in general, because economic sustainability is basically long-term profitability, right? Survival and
Mhm.
profitability in the long term. And I do think that they're quite good at that here in Taiwan. Also, getting back to culture again, I'm sorry for
It's
always
okay. Go
repeating
on.
culture, okay?
It's
But
okay. It's good.
most studies agree that countries in the Asia Pacific tend to be more long-term oriented in their cultural orientation than Western
Mhm.
countries, and especially than America. And for that reason, I think that a lot of business owners slash managers here, they think a lot in terms of long-term, not only short-term profits, but also long-term profitability, which sort of equals economic sustainability, right?
Okay, David. Currently, there is a business hype in sustainable entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
Every self-respecting company tries to brand itself as a sustainable entrepreneur. So business schools and employers organization devote whole conferences to the topic. Obviously, we can see that everywhere.
Yes.
Many terms, yeah, many terms are used like corporate social responsibility, ethical funds, eco
Hmm.
efficiency, and so on. So
Yeah.
although these words reflect different concepts, they
Yeah.
all point at a various aspects of sustainable development. There is
Yeah.
also a booming business in expensive sustainable entrepreneurship certificates. So, yearly sustainability reports are published almost exclusively by big companies. We can see that in Malaysia. We can see that a lot. I'm not sure about in Taiwan. So, David,
Yeah.
this raises the questions here whether SMEs that constitute up to 90% of all businesses actually can afford to be sustainable entrepreneurs. What is your point?
Well, it's again, I don't think it's the same. I have the We have the same answer everywhere, and in this case, I think it has a lot to do with what consumers want, right? So when you walk into a supermarket in several European countries that I have visited, almost every product, regardless of whether it stems from a big firm or a small firm, is branded as ecologically sustainable, organic, net zero, net negative, etc. Now, why is that? It's because in those economies, in those countries, a lot of the consumers care a lot about environmental sustainability. If you're in an Asian country, you see some of that, but not at all as much as in Europe, right? Which means that the consumers maybe in many cases care more about a low price than whether the
Mhm.
product is environmentally sustainable or not. I guess that if everything was equally expensive, they would probably pick the sustainable product. But there are more price sensitive consumers here, and they might not be as accustomed to thinking in sustainability terms. So in the sort of, at least in the Western European context, I think it's a very good business plan to think a lot about environmental sustainability. Well, it might be good from a more sort of general point of view, but from a profitability point of view, it's a little bit more challenging in many Asian countries. That's my
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah, yeah,
impression of what the situation is
yeah,
like.
yeah, exactly. In Malaysia, also, we actually cost more to being for being sustainable. You pay more for any eco product than the actual product, like what you
Yeah,
said, the
yeah, but
price.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry if I may I interrupt you once? I just
No, no,
thought
no,
of
it's okay,
something
it's okay.
that that,
No,
that I
it's
think
okay. Go on.
is
Yeah,
really
go on.
important. So one thing that sort of annoys me a bit is that a lot of companies they think a lot in terms of marketing, right? And making sure
Yeah, yeah.
that people think that they're sustainable. But sometimes they might be aiming for what looks superficially sustainable rather than what is really sustainable. And
Yeah, yeah.
one of my pet peeves here is that one of the biggest contributions that you could make to a sustainable, well, a sustainable to sustainable development in environmental terms would
Mm,
be to install better windows in businesses. For why is that? Because air conditioning uses up a lot of energy, and if you have bad windows, a lot of that energy will seep out. It will sort of escape into well the neighborhood where it doesn't. You're just wasting energy. And
mm-hmm,
studies have shown that you can reduce the consumption of energy for cooling or for
mm-hmm,
heating by 30% by installing double glazing everywhere instead of a single pane. And yet, what I see in Taiwan is that less than 10% of businesses have double glazing, and yet they use air conditioning all the time. And an even worse
mm,
example is you have a lot of shop fronts, stores selling clothes, no door, no window, nothing, and they have extremely high use of air conditioning and they just let everything escape into the street, right? So those are things that firms don't think enough about. And it would make not only environmental sense, but also economic sense because they could save money by installing better windows, better insulation generally, and thinking more about actually using uh, cooling technologies. Mostly in Asia, it's cooling. In other parts of the world, it might be heating technologies in more energy efficient ways.
Do you think it's a bit unfair when you put it in this context? Let's say, okay, Malaysia is like, 365 days is always hot.
Yeah,
So
I
we
know.
don't have we don't have 4 seasons. I think you were here before. So
Yeah.
would it be so unfair when we put it this way? Then some of the businesses they cannot just like always like get ventilated in such a way because of the heat, and especially the few months ago there was a heat wave, so it will cause everybody feel so uncomfortable, which is when they go out. So
I'm
they
not
wa-
saying you shouldn't. I'm not
Mhm.
saying you shouldn't use
Yeah,
any air conditioning. I'm just
yeah,
saying
yeah, yeah,
you shouldn't waste air conditioning. So basically, if you
yeah.
have better windows and better walls, that's a higher initial investment that is associated with this.
Yeah,
But
of course, but
you save more money in the long run because your energy bill is going to go down, right? And you're going to use
yeah.
less energy, and it's going to be equally comfortable with better soundproofing, right? So it's just I think it's a lack of education in this field. I think that most people simply don't know about the sustainability strategies that they could easily engage in, but they don't know about it, right?
I think it's the way how we interpret um understanding of how do we make use of air conditioning, because people had the wrong interpretation, wrong
Yeah.
understanding. So it's very subjective. But of course, this is not right or wrong about this. It's just like how people respond to the heat, how people respond to the air conditioning usage.
Yeah, but then you have
So yeah.
the really ridiculous example. I mean, in Singapore, they probably have better windows, but they cool down their rooms too much. I have to put on a sweater when I go into a shopping mall in Singapore. It's like it's like a freezer, right? So that seems like
Like
a little bit over the top, and it's definitely not contributing to environmental
yeah.
sustainability, right?
Wow, sometimes certain places they don't like, they kind of like sweaty, petty, they kind of feeling. So that's the reason why they need to have like the whole places with the air conditioning. Okay,
Yeah.
okay, David. In today's ever evolving business landscape, sustainability has emerged as a pivotal force driving change, innovation, and competitiveness. While large corporations have often taken the lead in adopting sustainability strategies, the spotlight is increasingly turning towards a powerful and dynamic segment of the business world, small and medium-sized enterprises like SME. So we all delve into the intricacies of why sustainability matters to these enterprises. So, David, how do they navigate the unique hurdles they face and the remarkable advantages they stand to gain?
Well, again, I'm getting back to the differences between different parts of the world here. So I think that it will become, a source of competitiveness once the great majority of people are educated into, what is a cost-effective sustainability strategy versus a less cost-effective strategy, and also what actions count for more and what actions count for less. And I mean, I think that one of the things that small businesses in particular should focus on are the things that are maybe not so expensive to engage in, but that are very cost-effective in terms of what you achieve, rather than in some cases you have a lot of symbolic things that are engaging, like you put up a single solar panel or something on the roof to signal that you want to seem like a sustainable company, but maybe sometimes you use a lot of non-sustainable energy to produce that solar panel. I'm not saying that that is the case, but it could be the case.
Okay, right. I think it's a time to take a look at the question posted by the audience. There is a one question actually posted here. Can I be entrepreneur by my age 18?
That's it's an interesting question. I think it depends on your
Yeah.
background, right? So what studies have found is that people who become successful entrepreneurs often had prior experience working as employees for firms, right? And so if you grew up inside a family business, right? So you've been watching your father and your mother and your siblings engage in running a firm and coming up with new ideas and so forth. Yes, maybe then it is possible to be successful even at the low age of 18, right? But if you have no such prior experience, you probably have to wait for a while to accumulate experiences that are business relevant and relevant to entrepreneurs. Uh, Stephen, you have to unmute the microphone.
Have I muted? I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Okay.
I haven't heard a word of what you said, so you'll have to say it again.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry. All right. I think-
You're gone again?
Okay. This is very strange, actually.
Now I can hear
I
you.
didn't do anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Never. Okay. Let's go back to this. Let's start from the beginning. Entrepreneurship has become um recognized as a means of transforming economic sectors towards sustainable development. In particular, sustainable entrepreneurship who simultaneously strive for environmental protection, social welfare, and economic viability are increasingly regarded as important change agents. Due to the multiplicity of goals inherent in sustainable entrepreneurship, the successful exploitation of sustainable business opportunity can be considered as more complex than in the case of opportunities solely driven by economic consideration. So, David, how to increase the efficiency of the use of financial subsidies so that they activate entrepreneurship of business entities?
Well, I'm very critical of the use of subsidies in general, right? So, because what we've seen in the real world, in many different parts of the world, is that subsidies are often a reward for not being efficient, right? So, that's why I always stress the need for redefining property rights and improving the legal system and so forth, because uh, I mean, if you obviously there are exceptions, like subsidizing education might be a good idea, right? But subsidizing profit-seeking firms, I'm very skeptical about that. And uh, and also when you think about the various kinds of sustainability, when you just say sustainability, everybody assumes that you mean environmental sustainability. But the problem here is that a firm must be economically sustainable to survive, right? It doesn't mean that it must maximize profits, because it's an illusion that firms maximize profits. They seek profits, but a lot of them lose money. But at least they have to break even in the long run, right? Momentarily you might lose money, right? But over a period of 10 years, let's say, you have to at least break even.
Mhm.
So you need to reach that goal before you can start thinking about either environmental or social sustainability. Now, fortunately, the situation might be such that your profitability prospects increase if people in general demand environmentally sustainable output. So the crux of the matter here is, how do we get people as consumers to care more about the footprint of the goods and services that they are buying?
Is there any example you want to share with us? Like the footprint, especially you talk about footprint earlier on. I'd like to know.
Well, if you can have a reasonable, let's say, certification a reliable certification that a company is carbon neutral, let's say, and then that this is generally demanded, and to the extent that people are willing to pay a little bit more for something that is climate neutral, then that could have gigantic ramifications on the operations of all businesses. What we see, however, in the world is that not all parts of the world are equally concerned, right? So we see per unit of GDP, let's say,
Mhm,
the European Union is outperforming America, and America is outperforming China, right, per unit of GDP. And
mhm.
that means that the educational problem and the kind of the values problem is greater than China than in America, and it's greater in America than in Europe.
So, what is the ecosystem? I think there is a is it has to be compliant from the mainland China? Is it there is another way of doing things in Taiwan? Is
Well, I
it
think
any things that need to
I
be?
mean, like it's doing it's a little bit better here, but it's nowhere near as good as, like it's nowhere near as environmentally sustainable as what is presently the case in Europe, for example. If you look at emissions per unit of GDP and so forth, it's a lot worse here. And one of the
Mhm.
problems is the energy transition. So there's still a lot of coal power here. Coal is still used, and so it's
Mm,
coal, and then it's oil, like the second energy source, and natural gas is the third energy source. I know that they have a program now for slowly transitioning away from coal and toward
mm.
natural gas, and then later on renewables. But if you may allow me to be critical of policy decisions here in Taiwan, I think it was a big mistake to get rid of nuclear power.
So, how does it affect to the SME development, especially from this perspective?
Well, all the SMEs are using energy, but don't forget that the biggest user of energy is TSMC, the biggest company in Taiwan. They consume enormous amounts of energy, right? But they are seen as a priority for the economic policy of the government here, and it's a successful company, but actually the biggest problems are associated with big businesses here in Taiwan. I'm not saying globally.
It's fine. It's fine. I just wanted to know from your point of view, and which is I think you also can make a little bit of comparative studies, discussion about the differences between Sweden and Taiwan, and what actually the differences, what actually Sweden do, and the differences from Taiwan do.
I think the mindset is basically different because it's been so integrated into the thinking of most companies, and even virtually all of the political parties that are represented in the parliament there. So it's been just like generally accepted that environmental sustainability is an important problem that has to be solved in a smart way. And actually, one of the main decisions, now getting back to energy again, is that they've decided to rethink, because they also had this idea back in the 80s to get rid of nuclear power because of the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine. But they are reconsidering that in terms of thinking that new nuclear power is safer than it used to be, and especially safer than it used to be in the Soviet Union. So there's a lot of thinking about how to be smarter. And again, I also mentioned energy savings earlier, and they take that very seriously. So the standard in Sweden is not double glazing; it's triple glazing. So you have three panes of glass
Mm,
in your windows, which means you do not only reduce energy use at any level, any given level of heating consumption by 30%, but it's in excess of 40% if you have an additional layer. Again, this requires the preparedness to invest. You need, upfront investments are going to be more costly, but in the long run, it pays off.
okay, David. Because of the big, is it because of the weather? And when you mentioned about the
No,
technicality,
actually,
how to place a window.
heating is so Sweden is only heating. It's no air conditioning. It's a cold place, right?
Yeah,
Heating
yeah.
is uses less energy than air conditioning, so it's an easier problem
Mm,
for cold countries. For hot countries like Malaysia, it's an even more
yeah,
important. It's an even more important problem, right? But it's just that people in Taiwan or
yeah,
Malaysia use a
yeah,
lot of air conditioning, but it's a
yeah.
lack of thinking about this problem, right?
Yeah, we actually we have produced a lot which is uh what is it called, carbon monoxide. Yes, we
Yeah.
produce a lot of carbon monoxide, which is we had a big contribution to the ozone depletion because of that.
Yeah,
But
well,
it's
I mean,
not our
I
fault.
don't I don't know enough about Malaysia, but I would guess that neither Malaysia nor Taiwan are role models in this field.
Okay, let's slightly move into another, which is point of view. How can SME practice lean management with limited resources and skills?
Well, that is actually a question. You're saying with limited resources and skills, it means using resources more efficiently, right?
Put it
And
this way, yeah.
thinking more in terms of, what I always think. Again, I'm going to base this on my observations from Taiwan, since I have limited exposure to Malaysia, and I'm just going to assume that there are some kind of shared Asian characteristics, like we're in the same part of the world. So just because for that reason,
Yeah,
but
okay, no problem. Go on then.
time management is not, it's not really that strong here in Taiwan. So people work many more hours per year here than they do on average in Western countries.
Yeah,
But if you look at
likewise.
productivity, if you look at productivity data, what they produce per hour is actually much less, right? So there is room for productivity improvements.
So, do
And
you
it's
think
less.
that this?
I mean, like I have to qualify this. It's it's not due to lack of education. So if you look at education statistics, it doesn't look that bad, but there is still a productivity gap.
Is it because of the? Is because um the way we work, the way the Asian work, and the way how the European work
Well,
differently?
I'll tell you.
Because
Okay,
there's
so
also.
now I'm going to give you an example that's specifically
Mm,
about
mm.
Taiwan and Sweden, because those are the two countries in which I've lived longest, right? And there is much more bureaucracy here. There's many more forms to fill out. There's much less of smart technology to make things happen in 1 minute instead of 3 hours.
Is it because of for you, or is it in general?
Not for me personally. I have some very good research assistants who mostly deal with bureaucracy rather than
Okay.
research. But I mean, like there is a lot of paperwork, and you can be smarter about that. You don't really need paperwork anymore. You do it all digitally, and a lot of stuff could be done. And instead of having a document of 30 or 50 or 100 pages, you could have a one-page document, and then you could just have some sort of default contract in the background that you don't have to spell out.
Okay, since you just mentioned about technology, let's stick with that. What factors contribute to SMEs in emerging markets to adopt innovation practices?
Well, if you can find, I mean, the incentive structure is already there. So if you can adopt some sort of cost saving technology or cost saving work practice, that is in itself a source of profitability. And actually, it will also use less energy. So I just talked about, because when we think about environmental sustainability, a lot of it has to do with energy use. Well, that's one of two parts. So one is what kind of sources do we use? Do we use oil? Do we use nuclear? Do we use wind turbines? Whatever. That's one part. But also, how much energy do we want to use? And if you manage to reduce the amount of time you need to complete a task, you don't need to spend so much time in an air conditioned room, for example, right? Because you're going to get a shorter working day and you get, you know, many more things done. So if you're smart about it, so the incentives are there. So I think that now it's an educational issue. You need to educate people in how to uh, be be both be sustainable in a smart way. And I think we're approaching this, at least to some extent, by integrating sustainability features in most courses in business related programs at university. So for in the MBA programs, etc. Now sustainability has become a big topic. For example, when I teach courses here, I have to include sustainability as one of the topics in every course, regardless of the title of the course, even if it's accounting, even if it's microeconomics or whatever. So I think it's mostly an education issue.
David, I just go back to what you just mentioned about the incentive. Um,
Yeah.
what is the situation in Taiwan? How the incentive support, especially for those are the SME, when they run the business? I think that is you mentioned about this energy issue. So I don't know what is the tariff, in Taiwan. So is there any incentive support, especially for those of the SME, especially those are even micro, little SME when they run the business? So is there any support, or just leave it to them
I
how
think
they get along with that?
it's more at a macro level, right? So they manipulate the prices a bit to make it more expensive to use certain sorts of energy and so forth. But I don't think it's specifically targeted the smallest kinds of businesses. More at the big businesses are targeted much more.
Hmm. So, what is the ratio of the SME in Taiwan and comparatively with the big corporate, with all the big corporation out there? So, what is actually the ratio? Because I
Well,
think
most people work in SMEs here, basically,
so,
but
which is government over there, authority will be much more supportive for the SME more than the corporation. Actually, how
no, no, no,
what
no.
is the response?
It's more like the opposite way, right? So the
Oh,
ones who
okay.
get subsidies and grants are mostly big businesses, especially if they're somehow involved in high tech, right?
Okay,
Small
okay, okay.
businesses in general get less support.
Okay. What about the small businesses that they involve tech, like the startup, for instance?
Yeah, there is support for small businesses in the tech sector. So what you
Mm,
really want to do here is get into one of the science parks because that's where you get
mm,
the subsidies. That's where you get the support. Like, for
mm,
example, you don't need to pay for the land for a certain number of
mm,
years and so on. So that's very attractive. But that's only possible if you're in a select number of sectors. You can't choose your own sector. You have to be in the sectors that have been determined by the government to be the ones that are most promising and that they should support and so forth. Now, personally, I'm very skeptical of policies in general that try to pick
mm.
winners. I think that the winners will emerge from market competition.
What is
So
what?
when you say that tech companies are subsidized, it means that other businesses are being penalized, right? So why should they be penalized?
Yeah, you're right. Actually, but unfortunately,
Yeah,
they like to put up this kind of competition
yeah, and
to
it's especially
to be
it's
more picky.
especially
Actually,
It's especially true of every single Asian country I've visited. They all have these policies.
yeah, you're right. Actually, yeah. Okay, let's look at this because you mentioned about policy, and then also I like to look at what is the model, how it works. Um, how does the integration of extended how does the integration of extended enterprise resources offer a potential model for competitiveness and improved performance of SMEs?
Well, you lost me there. I didn't really understand the first phrase. Extended what?
I'm trying to understand from your side. Is there any integration of the extended enterprise resources offer a potential model for
Well,
competitiveness?
I mean, like the
Yeah.
most the most intrusive government initiative that I think is often a good one would have to do with education, right? So I'm a bit of a small government guy, right? So yeah, I think education is important, but I think what is really important is to provide a level playing field so that all companies can compete equally and that you don't favor. The problem is also one of corruption, right? In
Mm,
many different places, so that well-connected insiders who often own or manage big businesses, they are better able to get subsidies than people who are less connected to the, let's say, the political establishment, right? And so providing a level playing field is the best reform that could be undertaken anywhere in the world.
is it more common practice in Taiwan, according to what you said,
It's
especially
gotten a
from the
little bit.
SME?
Well, I think it's gotten a little bit better over time, but it's still not good enough.
But historically, I think Taiwan, in the 70s, 80s, is quite serious in these practices, in this kind of
Yeah, I
practices.
know, and there is
But
this
along the way,
narrative.
yeah,
There is a narrative here that I think is totally mistaken. There was a book it became quite famous, which was called
okay,
"Governing the Market" by Robert Wade, that came out in the 80s or 90s, and he tried to make the case that the interventionism of the Taiwanese government was what
uh huh,
propelled Taiwan's economic success. I totally disagree with this argument. And I think that we should look at relative benchmarks, right? So if in the 70s and the 80s, the colonial government in Hong Kong didn't intervene at all as much as the Taiwanese government. And I think Hong Kong was even more successful than Taiwan. I'm not saying they're more
mm,
successful today, but in the
yeah,
70s and
yeah.
80s they were.
So, yeah, I think if you, I mean, my understanding back to the history, what happened during the 70s, 80s. There was quite a kind of like mafia type of the like governance, and there's
Absolutely. I mean, corruption was a very serious problem. It's like now we're talking about corruption in Russia and places like that, right? That was almost, or maybe not as bad as Russia, but corruption was a major problem in the 70s and 80s. And also, I think
okay.
it's like, look at it this way: Taiwan
Would it?
performed
Yeah.
better. Performed better than China, right? It
Mm,
had it was closer to a market economy than China in the 70s and 80s.
mm.
Hong Kong performed better than Taiwan. Hong Kong was closer to an ideal market economy than Taiwan in the 70s and 80s.
Do you
So,
think
and
the SME?
you have the same culture or a similar culture in all three places.
Do you think the SME development over there is which is much more viable than today, or is it
Well, no, I think
before?
The SMEs were really important in Taiwan's development, but they were not the favored
Because
sector of the
because
economy.
all these like
I mean,
these
there
kind
is
of governance will affect.
I think it's like, okay, I think it's like this. There is a cultural predisposition here to create family firms. It's part of the
Mm,
culture, but they were not
mm,
favored by the government. The big businesses were favored. You can see the same thing happening in China with the reforms after 1979.
mm,
That the opening up policy of China favored well-connected big businesses and so forth. It didn't favor small enterprises, but it was the small enterprises that were the engines of economic development in China in those days because the
mm.
government didn't know better. Okay.
Okay, David, I want to know from your point of view, how can digital marketing facilitate the internationalization agenda of SME in contemporary times?
It's the only way to internationalize, right? Digital, a small enterprise can't afford to market itself outside of its home country or home economy without digital marketing. I mean, it's too expensive, right? So, and also, if you look at the demographic changes now, where young people are glued to their cell phones all the time, they don't watch television, they don't look at billboards, they just look at their phones, right? So digital marketing is the only way forward.
Do you think that they prefer to go out the country? They will. This is how. I mean, we talk about digital marketing. It's kind of like borderless. So there is no limitation. You can do anything you want because everything is go across the internet.
Yeah.
So yeah. Do you think the young people from Taiwan they they wanted to just go out to the island, or instead of like they still prefer the kind of like homey, which is enterprises SME instead of
Well,
like go abroad?
we have both
Mm,
types here. So what I encounter on a daily basis are ones that are more internationally oriented because they have chosen a program that is entirely in English and it's a business program. And when I talk to the students here, a lot of them are very open to the possibility of moving to another country and starting a
mm.
business somewhere else. You also have the more traditional types who don't want to learn other languages and who don't want to leave their hometown. So you have both types.
Okay, David. I think this is a great. Thank you so much for giving us the time today from your busy schedule. I know that you started your summer courses. I think MBA. So
Yeah.
there's a every day you have classes. I know that it's not that easy to get you on board, but it's very thankful for that, and you have promised, and then you agreed upon that. And then thank you for sharing all of your expertise, and it gave us a lot to think about that, especially from the Taiwanese context. And now, of course, you have shared about a little bit from which is your practices, the way how the European done, especially from Sweden. So it is absolute pleasure indeed, David. I appreciate it.
May I engage in a little bit of digital marketing here?
Go ahead. Yeah.
We didn't get any Malaysian students this year, but we're going to repeat the course next year. It's called Seminar on the Innovation Economy in the Asia Pacific region, and international students can attend the course for free, right? So it's an
Oh,
attractive offer. You only have to
yeah.
pay the ticket and the hotel. You don't have to pay for the course. So this is going to be a tradition, and I'd like to thank you for having me here on the show tonight, and I enjoyed the conversation.
David, just send me the flyers, whatever, for next year. If this year we, of course, because you're running now,
It's too late,
so
yeah.
you just Yeah, it's too late, but you can send me the flyers or whatever, little small booklet. Then I
Yeah,
will just share it to my school, and I think I will share this with the student as well. So like I think this is quite uh, enlightened, which is we just need to pay the ticket. So then everything is all for free when we landed. So which is good.
yeah,
So yeah, please share with me. So if you have anything be prepared for next year, so then I will share this with the student.
yep.
O-
And I wish you all the best with your,
Okay,
with your, I don't know what to call this, your podcast
live cast, yes, live
series or
podcast. Yeah,
live podcast series,
yeah,
the Spotlight Dialogues, right?
yeah. Okay, thank you, David.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Right, little conclusion here. SMEs play an important role in economic development of any countries. They provide wide employment opportunities and promoting equitable development. They facilitate industrial development in backward areas, thereby reducing the regional imbalances and promote equitable distribution of income and wealth, which is David has mentioned that earlier on. Now, many companies much focused on environmental challenges, which David also has highlighted. Sustainability has become a major problem today for the better life of future generations. Many large companies are adopting green manufacturing practices in their businesses, which is we had a little discussion about that earlier on. SMEs in the face various challenges in the post-globalization era, especially nowadays, especially in the Southeast Asian region. Because of the tight competition, lack of innovation, and market challenges, this is one of the which is a key issue affect the development. But of course, we are doing better, and every year. So I think along the way we will get things done and accordingly. Even so, globalization brings many new opportunities. Has emerged as a highly vibrant sector in the economy, especially the Asia Pacific region, over the last 6 decades. We know that in the long run, all the aspects of the sustainability should be given equal importance. We should consider environmental, social, economic sustainability. All these three components have created a good value for the firm. And it was a indication from David earlier on as well. Before we go, a hypothetical questions here. This has just come across in my mind. Are there any significant relationship and impact between green activities in various stages of product life cycle and firm's green performance for the stakeholders of SME? Yes, let's think about that. With that in mind, thank you very much for tuning in to Spotlight Dialogue series organized by Special Interest Group, Circular Economy from Integrated Sustainability and Creative Strategies Research Classes, ISUCs at Asia Pacific University of Technology and Innovation, APU. Till then, take care and each other. Happy evening.